Eaton Partners, 9 offices, 70 plus people, 40 years in business, and focused on, again, the small middle market for classic commingled fundraising. But an area that we've been focused on for about 7 years that has really taken off is our secondary co-investment direct area. And that's been an outgrowth of our fundraising because, as people know, raising funds can be difficult. And a lot of times what we've done is implemented these secondary and co-investments as a great way to leverage and accelerate fundraising for our clients. What is a GP-led transaction? Would you define it? And maybe I'll add in there, counterpose it to our classic LP transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I would go back to the early days when Eaton Partners was doing these. And what we tried to do is get GPs to be assertive in offering LPs liquidity. For a long time, LPs, they only had an option to sell their LP interests. Often they would go to the GP and say, hey, I'm thinking about selling my LP interest. Our advice to general partners at that point was to be assertive, get involved in that conversation, see if there were other like-minded folks that wanted to sell, and really get involved and take control of managing a process to achieve LP liquidity. I would say the GP-led transactions are most often catalyzed by their LPs, but not always, right? They're just driven by strategic initiatives at the general partner. In a GP-led, you have 3 constituents, you have 3 stakeholders, you have the existing LPs, you have the GP, and you have the buyer. And I think in order to structure a successful transaction, you need to create a win-win-win. I think an experienced advisor like Eaton can help architect and execute successful transactions when you have 3 constituents. And I think the point of this slide is to give you a sense of what each constituent is looking for and why these transactions work. I think no conversation that talks about the secondary markets is probably complete until we look back and understand how this market has evolved. It has experienced a significant evolution from the early days 20 years ago, and spent the first 10 years as a very LP-centric market with dedicated buyers buying portfolios of LP interests. And we have really evolved into a market that's been largely driven by GP-led transactions. This is without a doubt an M&A process targeting passive buyers. That is the biggest difference, right? We are running an M&A process. We're very clear with the rules of engagements to our counterparty. We tell them what are the rules of the transaction, what are we trying to achieve, and it's an M&A process because you're either selling a single asset or multiple assets. And that's 100% how we approach it, and that's 100% how we execute it. We're going to have just shy of $200 billion earmarked for this business. I think that's quite significant. So we are a long way from a market being driven by portfolio or LP portfolio sales, and this market will be dominated for quite some time from these GP-led transactions. All
right. Well, it looks like about 2/3 of you have utilized, looking for co-investment outside of your existing LP base. With that, Stefano, I'll ask you to jump into and give an overview of what we're seeing in the market here for co-investments and directs.
As you can see, the co-investment market and directs really is keep on growing steadily and constantly in terms of asset under management. And just compared to 5 years ago, it increased twofold. So we're now in a market that is very attractive and is involving more and more different kind of players.
I think the real COVID effect, and frankly, the market came roaring back in the fourth quarter. There was, if you talk to our buyers and ourselves and people like ourselves, people were flat out doing basically a full year of transactions in a quarter and a half.
They are seeing 3 times to 5 times the normal flow. To Michael's point about what do we see during COVID, there's an increased amount of flow. We know that LPs, of course, always chirp that they want to see co-investment. And what we're hearing from the LPs is for them to make informed decisions on who they want to participate with and get to know better. It's about the quality of the process that the GP runs and the quality of the material that they provide. And therefore, it has to be a pretty disciplined process, which is why we always then encourage, of course, an advisor such as Eaton Partners, because you can't just kind of wing it anymore. The LPs don't have the time nor attention, and they will put you on a lower priority.